reports that government fighters have pushed rebels back from Bin Jawad. There have also been reports of airstrikes and attacks in Misrata and the oil town of Ras Lanouf. Just outside of Ras Lanouf, rebels say they've shot down one of Gaddafi's warplanes. This was the scene on Saturday. Wreckage and bodies appear to be strewn on the ground. Rebel forces say that they used an anti-aircraft gun to down the plane and took a crew of journalists to see the site. The Libyan government has announced widespread tax cuts to mark what it calls victory over the rebels. Libyan state television has been showing shots of celebrations on the streets of Tripoli. At least 4 British citizens are being held by rebel forces in the Libyan city of Benghazi. The news follows reports that at least 8 Special Forces soldiers were detained while escorting a diplomat trying to talk with the rebels. In Bahrain, protests are continuing. For the second week, a large crowd has blocked the entrance to the Prime Minister's office. There's a heavy police presence inside the gates there. And elsewhere in the city, demonstrators, mainly from the Shia Muslim majority, remain camped out at the Pearl Roundabout in the capital, Manama. Egypt's new interior minister has pledged to restore public confidence in the police. It comes after protesters stormed the headquarters of the state security apparatus in Cairo and Alexandria. They said they were trying to stop evidence of torture and abuse being destroyed by police. The Afghan president, Hamid Karzai, has told the US that civilian deaths in his country are no longer acceptable. Hundreds of protesters took to the streets of Kabul to demonstrate against US military operations. Last week, President Karzai told the US President Barack Obama that civilian casualties were a serious problem. A roadside bombs killed 12 civilians in eastern Afghanistan near the border with Pakistan. The attack happened in Paktika province. Another 5 people were wounded when the bomb exploded next to a truck which was packed with people. Now, reports suggest that the dead included 2 children, 5 men and 5 women. Those are the headlines. The news continues here on Al Jazeera right after Listening Post.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at the Listening Post. This week, one story in Pakistan reported 2 different ways.
Was he a CIA contractor? Was he a diplomat?
The CIA agent and the media.
The protesters continue to chant.
Nigerian journalism gets a shakeup all the way from New York. China clamping down on the news media to keep the Jasmine Revolution from spreading to the Far East, and taking stock of the footage they call B-roll in our web video of the week.
Do you need shots of ordinary people doing things for your next commercial? We got that B-roll.
We got that B-roll.
A pretty big news story has been unfolding in Pakistan over the past few weeks. Don't feel bad if you've missed it. Much of the news media did too. Some of the outlets that did report the story got it wrong and may have done so deliberately. On January 27th, an American named Raymond Davis allegedly shot and killed 2 Pakistani men in Lahore who he claimed were trying to rob him. The Pakistani media first speculated and then reported that Davis was with the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. He was a CIA spy. The U.S. Embassy said that Davis was a mere technical advisor, and the State Department in Washington urged the U.S. media to go with that version of the story, which they did, until a British newspaper, The Guardian, reported that Davis was in fact CIA. Our starting point this week is Lahore, Pakistan. The case of the unquiet American, the disquieting effect that this incident has had on U.S.-Pakistani relations, and the noise that now surrounds the coverage and non-coverage of the story.
Pakistan. Tonight, an American man is in prison there accused of murder.
When the story first broke, It was a broad daylight affair.
It's just had blanket coverage in the Pakistani media. For the past month, the headlines have been entirely dominated by the Davis issue.
Investigations are underway and more facts about the shooting incident are being uncovered.
The situation always seemed a bit murky.
What had been painfully obvious, that Raymond Davis worked for the CIA, has now been reported.
Actually, the CIA connection was not obvious, not in the American media, because they did not report it until February 21st, 25 days after the killings and weeks after the Pakistani media were saying the shooter worked for American intelligence.
If you tune in to Pakistani television stations, day in and day out, they're talking about this incident, they're talking about the relationship with the United States, the fact that CIA spies are able to work with impunity throughout the country.
In the Pakistani media, it had been out there for several weeks that Davis was a CIA agent. News organizations were covering protests where you had Pakistanis in the streets who basically were holding up signs saying that this guy was a CIA agent.
It's been a sort of, media firestorm, really. We've had actual interrogation tapes from Davis with the police or in prison being released to the media and aired, and really this is, I think, pretty unprecedented stuff.
Initially, the Pakistani media's coverage ranged from the resourceful to the speculative to the bizarre. Reports that Davis was recruiting for the Pakistani Taliban, even supplying al-Qaeda with nuclear material.
The Pakistan media, in my view, has really been irresponsible in covering this. It's really infotainment. They bring on provocative guests who make a number of spurious arguments that are very much targeted to inflame and to arouse sentiments. You could say the CIA, I had a weather machine that made it snow in Lahore, and there's going to be someone that's going to buy that story.
But for all their editorial excesses, at least the Pakistani media were reporting the story with the CIA angle, which raised once again the problematic relationship that exists between Washington, Islamabad, and two intelligence communities that do not trust each other.
The media is playing a leading role in putting pressure on the government. Had the media not discovered this case, the government possibly would have made some sort of a compromise with the Americans, let Raymond Davis go. But the media itself is now putting everything back on the front. It wants the government to be on a back foot. It wants the government to answer.
For the first 3.5 weeks, U.S. media outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Associated Press news agency, were all reporting the shooter was a diplomat. They later admitted they did that at the request of the U.S. State Department, which said revealing Davis's CIA affiliation might put him at greater risk. The State Department asked the same of the British newspaper The Guardian, but given what was already public knowledge in Pakistan, The Guardian did not cooperate.
There were several emails backwards and forwards where the CIA presented their arguments, but in the end, our assessment really was that the safety threat to Davis was not linked to publication of any story. They were already burning his effigy in the streets, calling him a CIA agent. So really, it actually wasn't such a great secret at that point. There was also a sense that perhaps the CIA was using this safety argument as an excuse to have him released